Welcome to Prospects to Pros, where we talk about the guys who are about to enter the NFL, the guys who just got into the NFL, and everything in between. I'm Andy Staples. We have the Athletics draft guru Dane Brugler here, but even more importantly than either of us, we have one of the most important guys in the draft industrial complex, Senior Bowl Executive Director Jim Nagy. Jim, how we doing?
I'm great, Andy. That's quite an intro, man. Thank you.
Oh, well, listen, you wield a lot of power. You're the one who introduces us to the guys that sometimes we don't know a whole lot about. And then after they spend a week with you in Mobile, a lot of teams want to throw a lot of money at them.
Yeah, well, we hope that's the case. We hope so.
So what has this year been like scouting? I love when you go and you got eyes on the ground at various sites, and you'll tag us every once in a while. And I think you tagged me on an Osiris Torrance tweet. You're like, this is what an early round offensive lineman looks like. And I was like, wow, there haven't been many of those in Gainesville lately. So that's pretty nice.
Yeah, it's been a fun year. I mean, we're really kind of wrapping up the scouting process, and you guys know, I mean, it's year round for you guys, and Dane, I know how hard you work at it. So, we started really like last February, a couple weeks after our game, kind of give the staff some time off, a couple weeks to recharge the batteries, and then we get right back at it. And then we had a lot of turnover in the off season. We had 3 scouting assistants move on and get jobs at the college level, and our DFO left to get a job in the NFL. And we had 4 scouts off last year's area scout staff get jobs in the NFL. So we're always restocking the deck of scouts. So just getting everyone back on board and out on the road is a process. But, man, it was a lot of fun. And the one layer that we kind of added to it this year, we've been doing the Senior Bowl Scouting School back way before me. Phil Savage was doing it for a long time. And I'd always come down and speak at that. And the only new wrinkle we've put on it, we just open it up to former players now, because we're really trying to make an impact with diversity hiring in the league and getting former players into the profession. And so we got those guys out on the road this year with this apprentice program. We had them go out with our area scouts and kind of see the protocol of how you do a game and handle yourself on the road. And then we cut those guys loose. And so that it seems like we were everywhere, even more so than most falls this year. It's because we had some extra bodies out there. I think we were at double-digit games every weekend through the first 9 or 10 weeks of the college season. So, but it's wrapping up and invites are out. We're building the roster. So it's just an exciting time.
Before we talk about some specific players, with the pandemic and all the changes in college football, the transfer portal, what have been the challenges from your perspective with just the constant evolution of how things are playing out here the last few years?
That's a really good point, Dane. Good question. The biggest challenge was having the game during COVID. So we had the game 2 years ago, kind of in the peak of COVID. So hopefully we don't have to pull something like that off again. But the biggest challenge is just figuring out which of these players schools want to get back. And I think our process, again, long predating my time at the Senior Bowl, the protocol has always been to send the Senior Bowl invites to the head coaches of the school and then let them disseminate the invites, at their own discretion. And that's really worked well this year because we've sent them out based off who we know is eligible. And we've gotten some phone calls from some schools saying, well, Jim, we're trying to keep this guy in, or we're going to at least talk to this guy about maybe coming back. So that has definitely complicated it, because when the invites go out the door, you kind of have a roster number in mind. And then, you get 2 or 3 phone calls and they might be about 3 offensive linemen. Now you're down 3 offensive line spots. So I'd say that's the biggest thing. I can't wait to get through all the COVID numbers so we can just get back to normal and we know who we're going to get and who we're not going to get, and who we can go after and who we can't go after.
Is it also like the NIL, has it changed the math with some of these 4th-year players where, if you don't think you're going to be a 1st or 2nd round pick, but you're doing fairly well with NIL, do you think about staying another year in college and maybe seeing if you can make a jump?
It totally makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I don't know if that's like come up yet. We've anticipated that, but I'm trying to think if there was an instance where, a guy.
That's why I asked, because it's happening in basketball, but I haven't heard of it happening in football yet.
Yeah, we had 5 or 6 guys last year accept their Senior Bowl invites and go back. DeMarvion Obershon from Texas, Riley Moss, the corner from Iowa. There's a handful of those guys, and I don't know if that was NIL related or not. Maybe it was. It's just kind of we get the word from the school, or like the player will reach out and say, Jim, like here's how my decision went down, and I think I'm just going to go back and try to develop. But no one's really cited NIL, but that could certainly play a part of it.
Well, and as just a refresher for our listeners, what are the exact requirements to be eligible for the Senior Bowl? Because it's like you mentioned, it's not quite as simple as just being a senior anymore.
Yeah, it's definitely more complicated with the COVID thing. So let's just keep it for this year in particular. If you left high school in 2018, you're automatically eligible. You can play in the game. If you left in 2019, you would have had to played 5 or more games in four seasons, 5 or more, not 4 or more. Because if you play 4, then schools can use that red shirt on you. Where we got into a little trouble, we were using those standards. Like Siaki Ika from Baylor was a guy that didn't play 5 games in 2020. So we went through the fall. We didn't put him on our watch list. Dontavian Wicks is another guy. Like we were trying to just like do right by the NFL guidelines and not put those guys out on our watch list. And then we submitted a list to the league office, about a month ago or so, 3 weeks maybe. And a bunch of those guys came back that they are eligible because they literally wiped away that 2020 year. So it didn't matter if you played in 13 games in 2020 or 0 in 2020, that counted as a full year. So if you got your 5 games in 2019 and didn't play at all in 2020, I'm probably confusing you now, but basically 2020, whatever happens, but you had to play 5 and 8 and 19 and 21 and 22.
Yeah, the Apuika is an interesting case because he left LSU mid-season, had to sit out, and you're not used to that. Normally, now they just go and play right away at the new school, and so I can't wait to see him in your practices. By the way, because I love the idea of an interior defensive lineman from the Big 12 doing big things, because I think that league needs to be able to show proof of concept to those players when they're getting recruited that, hey, you can be good here. You can be an effective NFL player. You can be a high draft pick. Because Ross Blacklock, I think, is the only interior defensive lineman out of the Big 12 that's been drafted in the first round in 4 or 5 years. So
yeah, it's a dated reference now, Andy, but I think it was my last year with the Seahawks. The entire Big 12 conference had 6 defensive players invited to the combine. In that same year, Alabama had 7, LSU had 7, and I think Florida had 6. So you had 3 teams in the SEC with as many or more players. So again, I think the Big 12's done a better job since then. I think it's coming around. But yeah, to get Ika in the game is going to be big. I mean, especially for him, he's projects as a 2-down nose, and the question is like in a starter level nose, but in order to make that next jump, I mean, he's really going to have to show down here that he can at least push the pocket and affect things on 3rd down to really take that next jump. I think we saw that last year with Travis Jones from UConn. Came down here, and I was surprised he lasted in the 3rd round after the week he had. Yeah, I think we saw Travis Jones from UConn's a great example from last year as a big nose that came down here and did a lot of good things in one-on-ones and showed he had some 3rd down value against guys like Cole Strange and Zion Johnson, who went on to be 1st-round picks. So hopefully Siaki can come down and do something similar in one-on-ones and show teams that he can at least collapse the pocket and it isn't just a 2-down player.
Well, and another guy that your game was the first exposure for a lot of people to was Christian Watson last year. And obviously he had a massive game against the Cowboys on Sunday, and looks like he could be the next star for the Packers. When you got a guy from the FC, he was at North Dakota State. When you got a guy from the FCS level who can really make that leap, how excited are you to watch them in those practices?
Very excited. I mean, I think Christian's an interesting case, guys. Like, we talked about it before with our scouting process. Like, it's important to me that we do all our own work, and that's why we've built a real scouting operation out here now. But part of our process, once we're done, is getting in and using our relationships with the NFL, and really vetting out our roster to them and making sure we're inviting the players they want to see. And a year ago at this time, when we went through that process with about half the league's teams, and we do it all with GMs and director level guys that can either sit in the draft room or have the computer pulled up and just, look at a position group and we just trade grades. I mean, Christian Watson was like a 4th or 5th round pick for most teams a year ago at this time. And we had reservations on his hands. That's kind of what held us back. I mean, he clearly played at a different speed at the FCS level. And then, so that's why he wasn't even a first wave invite for us last year because the league was so low on him. We wanted to kind of watch how things transpired in November. And then he comes down here, and not only is that speed carried over, like it was obvious, watching the FCS stuff, but come down here, even day one, I had Senior Bowl committee members that aren't trained scouts at all coming up to me like, who's the North Dakota State guy? So yeah, for him to go from the 4th or 5th round a year ago at this time all the way up to 34 overall, I think you could say the same thing with like Troy Anderson from Montana State. I mean, he was a 5th or a 6th for most teams when we made those calls, and he gets all the way up to, top 50, like right there at 50 for Atlanta. So yeah, I think all the players can benefit from coming down here and having a great week, but especially those small school guys, because it's such a prove-it platform for those guys coming from the small school level.
Going back to the Big 12 defender discussion, Tyree Wilson, great get for you guys. Physically impressive, 6'5.5", 275 pounds, over 35-inch arms out of Texas Tech. Not just tools. I mean, he leads the FBS in pressures. I think his tape has gotten better every year. I know for me, he was clearly the best defensive senior on my board. How does that match up with you and your staff and what you thought of him when you stacked your board?
Yeah, Tyree's an easy guy to like. I mean, just looking at it on paper, he's an interesting guy, right? And then you put on the tape, and to me, the thing that sticks out, most longer bodied guys like that, with that kind of reach, have a hard time like generating sudden power. And to me, that's one thing he can do. And so, he's just a mismatch because he's got length, he's got power. You can put him out there in the edge, you can put him over guards. I mean, he's just really got some cool versatility as a rusher. And like you said, you cited the pressure numbers. It's not always sacks. It's how can they affect the quarterback, and he's obviously doing that at a high rate. It doesn't always show up on paper unless you dig into the deep analytics, the PFF stuff, where you get the pressure stuff and the pressure rate stuff. But he was an easy guy to invite. I mean, honestly, like I haven't even watched a ton of 2022 tape because it's like doing Aiden Hutchinson a year ago. Like you watch his junior tape, the guy's going to be a 1st round pick. Like I don't have time to spin my wheels and watch a bunch of Tyree Wilson tape when we know we want him in the game. You got to really focus on those 4th and 5th rounds where our cut line usually falls.
Well, but a lot of guys who are potential 1st round draft picks will shy away from the game because they don't want to get hurt, don't want to compete. When a guy who projects as potentially one says, "Hey, I want to go play. I want to show what I can do against these guys." How much can that help that person?
Well, I think if you look at the guys that have come down here and have been in that 1st round range, like that somewhere mid-1st to mid-2nd, I mean, they all help themselves. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Like I've told the agents since I got this job, like to me, our game makes more sense for the high round guys than the lower round guys, because you can be Terry McLaurin and you can come down here as a 5th or 6th round pick and get all the way to the 3rd round and jump 2 or 3 rounds and make a lot of money. Or you can be Kadarius Toney, who was probably somewhere in that 35 to 40 range for most teams, and get up to 20 and move up 15 spots and make a lot more money than Terry McLaurin did. So it's the guys that want to compete. I mean, I'll share a brief story. Like last year, trying to get Von Miller back down here for the Hall of Fame event, I was talking to his agent, Joby Brandian, and Joby's like, "Oh, Jim, he'll be fired up about it. He loved his Senior Bowl experience." And Joby just shared with me, like he was recruiting Von that fall at Texas A&M, and there was 2 other big, well-known agents going after him, and they were both telling him not to play in the Senior Bowl. And Joby was like, "Well, let's just see this thing through. Like, finish your season, we'll talk about it." And when Joby started talking to guys in the NFL, they had him as like a mid-round pick. And I told Joby, "I'm glad you didn't reach out to me because he's one of the highest graded defensive players I ever did." I think I had an 8.0 or an 8.5 on Von Miller coming out, but so he said, you're a mid 1st round pick, like, and you can rush the passer, and that week is set up for guys like you that have your skill set. So Von came down and he ripped it up all week, and then he goes out in the game and he plays every snap of the game. And Joby was like sick to his stomach trying to, watching Vaughn go through the whole game, and he wins MVP of the game. He has 2 or 3 sacks. And he went 2nd or 3rd overall. So to go from like a mid-first round picked up there, I mean, you're talking, tens of, $10, $15 million. So again, to me, it makes sense for all the guys. If you're worried about injury, we've took a deep dive into the stats over the last 5 years since we've been here. More guys get hurt at the combine than they get hurt at the Senior Bowl. You just wouldn't think that because our guys are in pads, but there's more non-contact stuff, torn pecs, ripped knees, that happen at the combine than they do here in Mobile.
Yeah, we've seen some of the best quarterbacks in the league. Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, go compete at the Senior Bowl, and that's been a lot of fun. Switching to the quarterback conversation, we've seen a couple of quarterbacks in the Pac-12 really stand out this year. 2 transfers that have rehabbed their draft stock, maybe, and forced scouts to reevaluate. Talking about Oregon's Bo Nix and Washington's Michael Penix, who just played a great game on Saturday. Obviously, we'll wait and find out about the medicals and all that. But just based off the tape, based off what they've done on the field, they both look like draftable players. What have you seen from both? Yeah,
they both they both helped themselves immensely, and I'm a little more intimately involved in the Bo Nix thing, just being down here in the state of Alabama and watching that kid play high school football, and then going to Auburn and being a legacy up there. And I felt it was really unfair. Like the Auburn fan base, he kind of became the whipping boy, for the issues they had up there at Auburn offensively. And again, there wasn't great offensive line play over his time here. And he made the decision to go out to Auburn, and it's been great to see. I mean, I saw an interview with him the other day that he has answers in this offense now. There's a check system. He looks a lot more comfortable, and that usually stems from having answers when you go to the line and you're not locked into a bad play that before you snap the ball that it's not going to work. So he's done a nice job. I think the big word to describe Bo in the past has been inconsistent, and he's become very consistent this year. And he's a really good athlete. We've all seen that. I mean, his ability to run around and ad lib and play a little sandlot ball. I mean, it's kind of what drew you to the athlete in some of the arm talent stuff. And now just the ability to play from the pocket. And I think Michael Penix's thing is just staying healthy. He's been a guy that's been beat up a bunch. And I just going back 2 years ago, he was at the Manning camp, and he was ripping it that day. I remember talking to Rhett Lewis from the NFL Network, who is an Indiana alum. And Rhett was interviewing him one day after the throwing session, and we started talking. I mean, he was lights out that day. I was over there in Thibodeau a couple of years ago. So, and then he had a down year last year. So to see him go back, and I know, Dane, you and I were texting yesterday. We were both watching that Oregon game. We were watching tape of that at the same time yesterday. So, both those guys have helped themselves quite a bit this year.
So we were talking about the transfer portal earlier, but I'm curious, now that you're getting a chance to see guys in multiple places, in multiple systems, multiple environments, and in some cases they look like different people. And you just mentioned Bo Nix and Michael Penix, which they both fit that category. Hendon Hooker's another one. There's a bunch of Hendon Hooker at Virginia Tech tape, but then he's got 2 years of Tennessee tape too. So how do you guys as evaluators reconcile when something looks completely different here from here?
Well, that's a great question, Andy. I think I was up at Clemson just like 2 or 3 weeks ago, speaking to their draft eligible guys. And I was talking to Woody McCorvey on their staff. Coach McCorvey's, as Andy, he's Dabo's right-hand guy. And his
Dabo's position coach at Bama. That's right. Yeah, I covered him at Tennessee on Philip Fulmer's staff.
Yeah. And so Coach McCorvey was saying when they played Va Tech 3 years ago, Hooker got benched, and they brought in another quarterback, and I won't even mention his name, but it's amazing to see the divergent paths of two players. I mean, Hooker ends up in Tennessee, and he should be sitting in New York for the Heisman presentation, and this other quarterback's out west right now and got benched midway through the year. So, but what it does, it allows you to go to two different staffs as a scouting operation. You can tap into two groups of people and gather information about the player. And for the player, it's not just rehabbing. I think, Dane used the word rehab themselves. It's also an image thing too. Like if you change schools, sometimes you can get pigeonholed as one thing in college. And college is a huge growth opportunity, right? Like we were all there. Like you're 4 or 5 years in college, you're not the same person as a senior that you were as a freshman when you came in. So a lot of these guys, when they transfer, they figure themselves out, and it's a new environment. They can kind of reinvent themselves as not just players, but as people. So I think it's a great growth opportunity for the guys. I just think for the NFL teams, it gives you an opportunity to really drill down with two different sets of people, and it can really illustrate that growth. I think as a team, you get a better handle on who you're drafting when you've had, when they've been exposed to, more than one building.
One of the more interesting quarterback prospects this year is actually from Division II, Tyson Bagent from Shepherd. I talked to him last night. Really interesting guy. It's funny listening to him talk about how in the offseason, he actually entered the transfer portal for a minute. He had offers from West Virginia, from Maryland, but he decided to go back. He decided to go back to Shepherd, finish what he started, be back with his teammates. His family's interesting. His dad's a world champion arm wrestler. But he accepted a Senior Bowl invite, and look, that's the exact type of talent that scouts want to see at an All-Star game, right? I mean, clearly productive, but how does his talent respond versus better competition with better throwing to better receivers, hypothetically? What about his tape that you saw from Bagent led to him getting an invite from you guys?
Yeah, there's a lot there, man. And you brought up, he's really a cool kid. I met the dad over the summer. His dad was up there when we brought the invite last week, and he's a huge personality. I think most people in Mobile are going to know Tyson's dad by the time the week's over. He's an awesome guy, but it's in Shepherdstown, West Virginia there. It's a town of 2,000 people. Tyson grew up there. Like you said, he jumped in the portal and talking to the head coach, if he would have got a USC or a Notre Dame offer, he probably would have made that jump. But it was, he didn't get those kind of offers, so he stayed. And to me, I love that, right? He stayed with his guys that he came in with. He valued that. He wants to win a championship with those guys. But from a skill set perspective, he is 6'3". He's 220 pounds. He's a big, strapped together, good looking guy. He can move around. What I like most, he can layer the football down the field, over coverage. He's accurate. Again, it's just one of those things that there's a lot of day 3 quarterbacks in this class. I think it's a bottom heavy quarterback group. I don't think, we talked about all summer that, the big narrative in the media that this was going to be this great quarterback class. I think there's a lot of them because a lot of them stayed in school for that 6th year. So I think there's numbers, but it's a lot of
great. We meant better than last year. I think that's pretty much all it is at this point.
Yeah, maybe that was the comparison. But to me, with Tyson, if it was Tyson with a similar day 3 grade to a bunch of guys that have played FBS football forever, he was our only sub FBS guy we had a draftable grade on. We didn't have any draftable grades on FCS quarterbacks this year. So to me, it's just knowing the purpose of the Senior Bowl and what this game is here for, and that's to help the 32 teams evaluate players and draft players. Like we owed it to the 32 teams to bring Tyson here and let him show his stuff.
Speaking of the FCS, one FCS player you and I talked about back at SEC Media Days, and Dane and I have been trading texts on this guy all year because he's just the look is unbelievable. The vibes coming off this guy are amazing. But Cody Mauch from North Dakota State, and I know he was one of the first invites that you sent out for this game. And you've had great experiences with North Dakota State guys. We talked about Christian Watson. Carson Wentz solidified his draft position at your game. And that's kind of the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, I mean, that Bison program is incredible. Yeah, Carson was the year before I got here, 2 years before. But yeah, it went from like late 1, early 2. I know in Seattle we had like a late 1, early 2 on him, and he goes 2nd overall. And Dylan Radins a couple years ago went in the 40s to the Tennessee Titans, and Billy Turner. I mean, there's a long list there. But yeah, Cody Mauch's a really fun player to watch. He's he's a really good athlete. What I didn't know was I saw some of the pictures once the invite came out. People posted pictures of Cody when he was this 220-pound tight end coming out of small school North Dakota football. Didn't even look like the same person. He had he had his head buzz cut, and now he's got the long hair. But he makes it look so easy at that level. Like there's never any strain. He's a far superior athlete against anyone he's playing against. He's super efficient technique wise. So again, he's not even a guy I watched a lot of 2022 tape on, because the junior stuff was so good, and him being an FCS level player, it was a no-brainer.
Yeah, being a former walk-on at tight end and to see what he's turned into has been a lot of fun. Another offensive tackle that just before we hit record that accepted a Senior Bowl invite, Jaelyn Duncan from Maryland, who has been a really talented left tackle for the Terps. Not the longest player, but you love the athletic tools. Stays balanced in pass pro. I really like his reset skills. But I think there's from scouts, I've heard feedback. Some say early second round, some say more late third, early fourth round. So seeing him in one-on-ones in Mobile is going to be a great opportunity for him.
Yeah, he is. I shy away from using the word elite. I think it's thrown out a little bit too much, but he's a very good to excellent athlete. I mean, he's a starting left tackle athlete at the next level. There's no doubt about that. I think the range just comes from, some of the competitive stuff. Sometimes when you're that talented, it's easy. It's almost too easy, and you can get bored a little bit. I think that happens a lot with corners. I remember doing Patrick Peterson at LSU, and I actually liked his return tape better than his defensive tape because I thought he played lackadaisical on defense. And when you just drill down and you talk to him after the season was over, he just was disinterested. He got bored, like he wasn't challenged, which tells you how talented he was in the SEC. And I think that happens with Jaelyn sometimes. He can do anything he wants athletically to stay in front of people. So it'll be a big week for him. I think that one-on-ones he can really solidify himself where he's at. I think he's, in terms of left tackle athletes, he's probably the best in the senior class. So he was a big ad for us. We're excited about getting him down here.
So of the guys that you've invited publicly or that have accepted, who's the one that came on the latest for you that you maybe didn't think was somebody that would be in your game, and then as the season went on, you're like, we got to make sure we get this person here?
The guys that have accepted already. Like I said, Ika and Dontavian Wicks were two guys that we were kind of late on just because we didn't think we would have them. Yeah. But in terms of, I'll say this, like we got one from Chris Rodriguez, the running back at Kentucky yesterday. Mm-hmm. And he's just one of the guys. Obviously, we liked him last year. He ran for whatever it was, 1,300 yards in the SEC. But he's one of those big backs that you appreciate the more you watch him. He just has that wear down factor. He's got kind of that tone setter to him. I mean, Kentucky's a different offense with him out there. And maybe I just appreciate those guys a lot. The teams that I was with in the past, going all the way back, my first year in Washington, we had Stephen Davis. And then I go to New England and we had we had Corey Dillon. And then in Seattle, we had Marshawn. Like, I just appreciate those backs that kind of set the tone. And Chris is one of those guys. So he was at a decent spot on the board last year, but the more I watched him, the more we just kind of kept pushing him up because I just appreciate what he brings from a physicality and toughness standpoint.
And broke a long one last weekend against Vandy too.
Yeah.
And he's a pretty skilled runner. Right? You see patience, you see some lateral agility to what he's doing. So I agree. I mean, he seems like the type of back that's just going to play for the next 10 years. And, maybe it isn't a 1,000-yard rusher or maybe he gets one or two of those, but he's just going to play for a long time because of what you said. I think another guy that really, he started high in the summer, but I think has sustained that. J.L. Skinner, the supersized safety from Boise State, I saw just was a recent announced accepted invite for you guys. You don't see many safeties that are 6'4", and legit 6'4", not just listed 6'4". He is a legit 6'4", 210, right. 215 pounds, and he's going to run probably in the 4.4s. So he's got that athletic profile. What do you envision his best NFL role being? Best position, best scheme, that type of fit?
Well, I think from a measurable standpoint, and you cut on the tape, and I still haven't seen JL myself physically. Like I think we saw Boise play. We saw them play 2 or 3 different times from 2 or 3 different scouts this year. So I got some of the video back from our scouts, but I haven't seen him yet. But anytime you see those measurables, he's not as thick as Cam Chancellor was, but in terms of a height safety, you automatically kind of want to stick that guy closer to the line of scrimmage and make him more of a hole player. But I'll say this, you brought up the 4.4 speed. He has legit range. I mean, and there's evidence of him playing from depth in the secondary, whether it's off the hash or off the post, and he has range back there, and he's got ball skills back there. He can track it. So he's not just a strong safety. I think he's got more interchangeable qualities to him than a lot of big safeties have. I think the thing for him coming down here is going to be some of the man-to-man stuff on tight ends will be big. I mean, if you can have that mismatch guy, I mean, every NFL team is trying to mismatch you on offense with a playmaking tight end. Now you need someone to take that guy away. If he can prove he's that guy, that's where you're going to see JL. I think right now for most teams, he's probably like a later day 2 guy that we've spoken to at least. And then he's probably got a chance to ascend from there if he comes down here and handles tight ends.
So you invited Nick Saldiveri from Old Dominion, the offensive tackle. That's a guy I talked to earlier this year, right after they beat Virginia Tech, and kind of been through it all. You know, they didn't even play a season in 2020 and stuck it out. When you find guys like that who are just kind of the glue of their team, how much can they kind of let scouts or let NFL teams understand that during the week of the Senior Bowl?
Well, that's a good question, Andy. I think what happens is, as a scout, you go into the school and you hear that stuff, right? And it's impactful. I mean, you go around the building and you're talking to all the different sources, whether it be support staff members or academic people or coaches or, you know, equipment staff, whoever it might be. I mean, you try to fully source the building and get different opinions from people that see these guys through different lenses. But it's even more impactful when you get, you know, one-on-one with the player and you hear him tell his story. You've heard it from everyone else. You've heard his story through other people's eyes. Now you hear it from their story. So it's really impactful. And I just know, you know, we're excited to get him down here because, you know, his head coach hit me up personally and went to bat for him on what a great kid he is and the type of upside that he thinks Saldiveri has on the field. And again, just as a player, like I really think he can be a high-end center. You know, just with his hand quickness and his foot quickness and his hand strength. And so he's going to be just doing some of that down here in Mobile as well, even though he's played mostly tackle there at ODU. And he's going to be coming down here to Mobile in a week. The Saturday after Thanksgiving, he'll be down here playing South Alabama. So I can't wait to get my first look at him.
Well, Jim, what can fans and media expect this year at the Senior Bowl? Any changes to what we've seen in the past? You know, I know you did such a great job, you know, expanding the Senior Bowl brand, and then COVID kind of disrupted things. So what's the Senior Bowl going to look like in 2023?
Yeah, similar. You know, we've built out the week. We had the Senior Bowl Summit event last year. It was kind of keynoted by Kirk Herbstreit, and we had Nick Saban and Sark and Brian Harsin and James Franklin, all those guys there for that. We do that Thursday night. We've got our Mardi Gras parade with our players, which, you know, Mobile is the home of Mardi Gras. If there's anything that Mobilians are more proud of than being the home of the Senior Bowl, it's being the original home of Mardi Gras. So, and because we pushed back a week when the NFL kicked to the 18-week schedule, now this is for the first time in a long time, we're overlapping with the actual Mardi Gras. So our parade on Friday night, the night before the game, is the first real Mardi Gras parade. There will be 60 to 100,000 people downtown for that. And then we do our concert Friday night, and we haven't announced that act yet, but just signed the contract on that. It's going to be a good act. But I'd say the biggest thing for the media, a little more availability this year. You know, we scaled it. We had to really scale it back for COVID. And media had to do interviews from the stands, and we got guys at podiums and whatnot. We're going to open the field back up after practices. So I think the media will like that. But again, last year we were still a little bit in it, right? So we still try to do, you know, be as safe as we could. So I think we're going to open things up a little bit more this year. But no huge changes. I think where we're at right now with the week schedule and where these players are at with the interview process, we've had a ton of interview time for our players. I think we're pretty happy with it.
The one-on-one pass pro drill needs its own television show. Like that should be, you should put that in prime time. Like each day's one-on-one pass pro period.
Preaching to the choir, man. I've been saying it to the NFL Network and ESPN for 5 years till I'm blue in the face. There should be a one-on-one special.
I want tail of the tape before each rep. Like, let's do it.
No question. No, you could produce the heck out of that. It would be great, but I don't know. I'm just a dumb football guy, so I'll just stay in my lane when it comes to that stuff.
No, that is absolutely my favorite part of it. Was it Trevor Penning and Kyron Johnson last year? Kyron Johnson from Kansas had an unbelievable day, including a rep that Trevor Penning, I think, would rather forget. But that is absolutely. I do have another O-line question for you, though, because you're talking about Nick Saldiveri and how he's a tackle at Old Dominion, and you're saying he could be a really good center. So when you invited Quinn Miners a few years ago from Wisconsin Whitewater, he started practicing snapping on his own to get ready to play center in your game. Now he's ended up playing guard for the Broncos, but he wanted to show teams that he could play center. What are you looking for in a guy who's never played center before, where you say, okay, this is a potential center?
Well, I think with Quinn, man, I'm glad you bring him up. Like, he's really an incredible story in what that year was all about. I mean, in terms of him playing center, he wasn't going to play tackle. You know, if you're going to be a one position player, you better be a starter, right? It's hard to be a guard only or a right tackle only and make a roster if you're a backup. So, you know, he had to try to play center. We didn't know what it would look like. He'd never done it in a competitive environment before. In that same year, Robert Hainsey from Notre Dame, same thing. I mean, Robert had played guard and tackle, but he came down here, and we had a 6th round grade on Robert Hainsey. In all honesty, before we brought him down, he was a guy that Brian Kelly really lobbied for to be in the game, and we had Liam Eichenberg committed that year. And Hainsey comes down and plays center. He looks better at center than he ever looked at tackle. So yeah, no, Quinn, I just think the willingness of those guys to come down and try it, right, and be vulnerable and say, you know what, I'm going to let it rip, and it might not be perfect, but I think the teams appreciate that they're competitive enough that they want to do it. Like, I tell all the guys that, like, they're not going to hold you to a huge high standard. They're not expect you to look like a Pro Bowler in these reps, but just the willingness and the ability to get better from Tuesday to Saturday. That's what they're going to measure, right? And so, yeah, a guy like Quinn to come in from Division III, you know, never putting a ball between his legs in his life, and then having to block a bunch of guys that from the SEC and the Big Ten, really one of the more incredible Senior Bowl things I've ever seen. And I've been coming down here for like 24 years.
All right. Well, Jim, thank you so much. I can't wait. Dane and I are going to be there. You know, I'm going to show Dane all the best places to eat in Mobile. I know he's been there a lot, but I got the secret spots, so I'm ready for that.
I got to hear about this, because I think I've got the secret spots.
Listen, I know where y'all go. You're going to the Royal Scam. You're going to those places downtown.
No.
But we're gonna get you out and about amongst the people in Mobile. So.
Hey, just find me a really good catfish place, okay? That's catfish. Southern catfish is like my favorite thing in the world.
We can do that, and I'll show you a nice barbecue place that's pretty close to where they're practicing. So we're in good shape there. Jim,
that's a really good spot. I know exactly. Brick Pit. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I think that one's that's a may it rest in peace place. I was going Meat Boss is the newer one, but
there you go.
Brick Pit was one of my all-time favorite. I love that place. So, Jim,
I'm partial to Moe's. Moe's is kind of like been my go-to barbecue wise in Mobile. So
chain barbecue.
So for the people that haven't been to Mobile, you now know there's plenty of barbecue options.
That's exactly right. I'm not sure who's a sponsor for you, Jim, so I'm trying to be very careful here with what I say. I don't want to get you in any trouble. So, thank you so much, Jim.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me on.